Hi YouTubers, I'm back for another What Would Have Happened If This Were in Real Life. Now, I was thinking all over again, I was thinking, what would have happened in, that is, so, I'm just thinking about, you know how, I was hoping for, a different idea, and, it's very obvious, and, oh, I was just hoping to do, one of these ideas, so, yeah. So let's get started. So this is what would have happened if the Phineas and Ferb movie were in real life. We cut open to the beginning of the movie, where usually starts off in the morning of the episode. The mom of Phineas and Ferb's mom eventually goes out shopping, goes out. Phineas and Ferb's mom and dad eventually go on a long vacation, while Candace is looking after Phineas and Ferb. So that's just how it goes through that. And then after all that, then Agent P eventually is set to stop Doofenshmirtz's new inator called the Devil's Powers Inator. So he can the powers inator. Well, technically he can control the powers. He can control the Devil's powers, and he can use them to create an army to take over the tri-state area. So this is how it's gonna go. So eventually Agent P leaves, and then basically so he eventually leaves in his flying spaceship or flying ship or flying thing or whatever it's called. I don't know. I don't know what he, the thing that he flies right over this area. Then meanwhile, Phineas and Ferb are now finding out a new idea, which of course is taking very different of a long time. They're thinking about actually getting finding a way to go through different planets and worlds, and then they say the same line that they say in every. And then they quote the same line that they've been saying. I know what we're gonna do today. They quote that same line. Then, meanwhile, Agent P eventually goes over to Doofenshmirtz. Doofenshmirtz captures him, just like in every other episode of Phineas and Ferb. And then there's the scene, and then he shows off his Devil's Powers Innators, Devil's Powers Innator, and then he eventually before he can use it, Agent P easily gets out of his gets out of his whatever he was trapped in by Doofenshmirtz. And then and then the Devil's Powers Inator actually is aimed right towards Candace, because she opened up her window. Because when she opened up her window, and then the Devil's Powers Inator Agent G accidentally turns on the Devil's Powers Inators, the one that's aiming right towards Candace, Phineas and Ferb's sister, and then eventually the evil Candace clone is eventually created. Then moments later, I'm just fast forwarding moments later. I'm just forwarding moments later, where the evil Candace clone is in there, and then Candace is locked in the closet. Then meanwhile, Phineas and Ferb are looking to see, well, that almost looks exactly like Candace. So they eventually but instead the evil Candace clone, instead of her trying to bust Phineas and Ferb, she's actually the one who's using Phineas and Ferb's planet and world teleporter invention to banish them to pretty much a world that's pretty much planned to banish them to the real world, aka planet Earth. So then eventually it's shown right here, and then eventually the intro logo loads up. This is the whole prologue and the intro logo, all that. Then we cut open to some human characters who are human brother characters who are just like Phineas and Ferb. And suddenly this time whenever they build something, they don't get away with it. That's kind of the whole point. They don't get away with all of that. They just Oh yeah, they don't even get away with it. They just they don't get away with like the inventions or anything. They just they potentially get in like jail, and their mom had and then the mom of the human characters eventually the mom of the human character brothers eventually has to free them because the dad can't do anything. So yeah, and then eventually Phineas and Ferb then eventually they end up crash landing on right they end up crash landing in their back seat. They eventually end up crash landing in the back of their car, and then the human brother characters introduce themselves to Phineas and Ferb, where they have no idea who they are, but you know they are the main characters. Meanwhile, Doofenshmirtz now has all the powers. Now that he has all his own evil powers, now he can use his evil powers that he stole from the devil. So he can use those the evil powers that he created, that he actually that the evil Candace clone actually created for her. Now Doofenshmirtz can use these powers to take over the tri-state area, but instead of this, Agent P, because of this, Agent P retreats and he ends up going to the same planet and world where Phineas and Ferb is going. Yeah, then we fast forward the human characters, all the human characters, and the human family character family. They introduce Phineas and Ferb to them. They have no idea what Phineas and Ferb are talking about, and then that kind of does narrow it down. And then we fast forward. Agent Key eventually goes in the search of finding Phineas and Ferb, and like keeps on going on and on. It just they keep on doing that until when Agent Key finally finds Phineas and Ferb, but instead only this time it's actually when Phineas and Ferb they actually meet Harry again, but they actually find out. So in the end they find out that just unlike the end, Phineas and Ferb find out that Harry is actually Agent P. So in this movie, it's still going to be like that because hey, if it happened once in the TV show movie, so it should happen in the Phineas and Ferb theoretical movie. You know, the one that's on the big screen. So eventually, Agent P tells that. So eventually, Agent P, who's now a human, who technically we finally get to see the voice of Agent P, or Harry, as Phineas and Ferb says, and then they eventually get to see their voice, and then Agent P is all like, Phineas, Ferb, you have to listen to me. Doofenshmirtz has evil powers, and he's about to take over the tri-state area. Knowing that they didn't have a lot of time, that Phineas and Ferb says goodbye to the human characters, and that pretty much, and then they aren't seen until the end of the movie. They aren't seen until like sometime near the end of the movie. Then Phineas and Ferb and Harry / Agent P, they easily find a way back to the tri-state area, and only to find out that Doofenshmirtz has ruled over everything. So technically, this is years later, after Phineas and Ferb's and Agent P's disappearance. So eventually Phineas and Ferb and Agent P they all contact all their friends and their friends' pets, and then they all come together, and then there's like this big battle scene. Yeah, there's this big battle scene, and then this big battle scene. It just keeps on going on and on. That would just be literally that would be the biggest ultimate battle scene ever in the Phineas and Ferb theoretical movie for the big screen. Then eventually we see Doofenshmirtz. He tells them to destroy Phineas and Ferb and their friends and their friends' pets, which of course, and Agent P, of course. And then eventually Phineas and Ferb and Agent P they go over to Doofenshmirtz People Incorporated, and then it basically ends up, and then it's a lot similar to the Phineas and Ferb Across the Second Dimension, where it's a lot like that, where mostly Doofenshmirtz is like easily not avoiding like Phineas and Ferb in Verb's attacks, which of course kind of makes perfectly good sense. And then we fast forward right after almost all this is done. Doofenshmirtz is almost taken out. Phineas and Ferb and Agent P eventually. There's would be lots of big music in this scene. Phineas and Ferb and Agent P, they finally took out like Phineas. They finally took out like Doofenshmirtz's powers. Thus his powers are transported back transported back with the devil's powers. And he says, "No, my powers! Look at what you've done!" And then everyone is cheering and all exciting. Phineas and Ferb and Agent P doing something finally good for themselves. And then Doofenshmirtz eventually he gets put in jail, just like in Across the Second Dimension. And then there's this scene where Phineas and Ferb and Agent P are actually congratulated for saving everyone within all that within. They congratulate Phineas and Ferb and Agent P for what they've done, and just like in Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope, they give them their free medals, and then eventually they have a song finally. Then in Phineas and Ferb, the Theoretical movie, they have a finale song, which is basically kind of great, and then it all ends off perfectly well. Then the human characters also get transported there, and they finally meet up with them, which is kind of very different. And then eventually they all live happily ever after. The end. Well, unless if there's a sequel. And then the credits roll with pretty much the same actors from the TV show and the TV movie and the Disney Plus original movie. And that was the Phineas and Ferb theoretical movie. Well, technically this was my idea of it. Now, I was thinking about doing this, and I was thinking about like, Ryan, why can't you, what if you could do a Phineas and Ferb theoretical movie? Like, what would have happened if this were real YouTube video? And I was thinking, oh yeah, it would be. And I mean, we all know that all the actors would be perfectly good for this theoretical movie of Phineas and Ferb. I know they'd look super cool. And they'd have awesome suits and all that. And that's kind of all that is. So yeah, I think it would have been a perfectly good movie. But maybe we will get to see it someday later in the future. And that's it for today. Peace out. Bye bye.